Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 24 playthrough of the Buffalo Wings. We have recently completed our first season in the major leagues. We were 71 and 91. That said, we've got a nice boost to our budget. We plan on having higher than the lowest player payroll in the league next year. And you can see we don't have a lot of money available to spend here on the first day of free agency because we are trying to go big or go home. We've offered Shane Bieber a 3-year contract for $24 million total, with a couple of team options in the second and third years to join our starting rotation. And more importantly, we have offered Shohei Ohtani a 6-year, $195 million deal to join our rotation as the ace of our staff. So if we can bring on both of those players, that will certainly address our biggest need, which was improving our starting pitching. And by improving our starting pitching, hopefully also improving our bullpen by moving guys who are fourth and fifth starters into the bullpen and getting rid of the weakest members of our bullpen. So if we're able to execute on those two moves, we'll feel pretty good about this team and our off season. Obviously, we will have some additional money. The areas that we would look to address are probably an infielder or two to potentially join us. They don't really need to be superstars. Obviously, it would be great to bring on a superstar, but I am not anticipating that we will be able to bring on a superstar as an infielder. Jeff McNeil might be an interesting choice with his bat, but he's fragile. He's almost 35. He's looking to make $18 million. He's a nice hitter, but at his age, with his defensive limitations and that fragility, not a guy we're going to be looking to give a long-term contract at $18 million a year to. Maybe Jake Cronenworth if he's still on the market in a while and his number comes down significantly. But again, probably not a perfect fit for what we need. So we'll deal with that as the off-season moves on. Right now, anxiously awaiting what we're going to hear back from Ohtani as well as Bieber. If we don't get one or both of those guys, I'd say Sandy Alcantara is probably our next guy that we'd go after. Looking for a lot of money for what he is at this point. I don't think he's actually as good in this OOTP universe as he appears to be in real life. But there are options out there, and we can certainly look at potentially trying to harvest the trade market as the offseason goes along if we fail on Bieber and or Ohtani. And looking at the calendar, we've got about 2.5 weeks to the start of the winter meetings, and we've got close to a month till the Rule 5 draft, which is festively going to happen on Christmas Day, apparently. That could definitely be an opportunity for us to find some help for our team, perhaps the back end of the bullpen, perhaps even a utility infielder, since that's a need of ours. Take a look, and we've only got 31 players on the 40-man roster right now, with some trades that we made to pare down the size of our roster and our major league salary responsibilities after the end of the season, but before arbitration and free agency. We'll have to, as we get closer to the Rule 5 draft, take a look at our Rule 5 eligible players. A couple of veterans who are in our minor league system, actually a lot of veterans who are in our minor league system are some of the more prominent names, so it's conceivable that we won't be protecting many players, but we'll investigate that further. But even if we have to add a couple of guys to the 40-man roster, still going to have plenty of capacity to hopefully strengthen our 26-man roster through the Rule 5 draft in about a month. And we've simmed ahead into December, finally heard from Ohtani, says that we are the leader right now. We are on the top at the top of his list. Would certainly love to be able to bring him on board. That would be a huge step in the right direction for this Buffalo franchise. And Shane Bieber says our offer is the best that he's gotten as well, although Cincinnati and the Mets look like they are also involved at this point. You may recall from our past episode, he was only looking for a 1-year deal. We offered him a 3-year deal with a couple of team options, so it's possible that the structure we have offered him may not end up working on his end. Hopefully we'll hear from him and Ohtani over the next week and a half or so. Would be great to have at least one of them locked up by the end of the winter meetings. And the Buffalo Wings, our players, we have landed our white whale. Not that we were really chasing him all that long, but the fans thrilled that Ohtani is on board. Ohtani did end up signing that 6-year deal that we offered him. If you remember from the last episode, we did front load it, given that we have a fair amount of excess funds right now and not a ton of great options on which to spend them. So he's going to be making $44.40 and then $36 million, so an average of $40 million for the first 3 years of the contract. But then as he gets into his mid-30s, the numbers drop to 30 and 25. And there's a vesting option in that final season requiring 162 innings pitched. That'll pay him $20 million for the 3rd year. So I feel to an extent that that's almost a team option if things aren't going well and he is not performing the way that we would have hoped. We just need to make sure that he doesn't get 162 innings pitched, although... Looks like maybe I messed it up. Some of you may have seen this. That says 162 games started, which certainly was not my intent. I was pretty sure it said it was innings pitched when I looked at the drop down, but maybe I messed that up. Well, regardless, he will not be vesting for that final year of the contract if he has to start 162 games for it to go through. I'm guessing that was probably a mistake that I made by clicking on the wrong thing. But we have our ace, still waiting to hear from Bieber. Clearly with bringing Ohtani on board, fan interest well over 100 because it was 99 right before we brought him on board. We had increased our potential ticket price to $30 with Ohtani on board and the fact that we had pretty good attendance last year. I'm going to try to generate a little more money, raise the ticket price to $31 potentially for next season. And we've got one of our big guys on board. We've got an ace pitcher now. Let's see if we can also reel in Bieber and give us a number 2 starter to go behind Ohtani. And Bieber has come back and said that he's looking for more money, which is, or not really more money, but a different contract. Still supposedly just the $9 million for 1 year. He actually still is willing to talk 3 years with us, just wants it structured differently. We were giving him an average of $8 million a year for 3 years with team options for the last 2. He's willing to basically do that structure if we just increase the average annual value of the deal about $1.3 million a year. So there's still a chance that we can get him on board in a way that gives us a lot more flexibility. The only thing that gives me a little hesitation is that we have gotten our first scouting report back on one of the international free agents, Romash Tasuku Nakajima. The Jima was covered there by the fact that we're scouting him again. We've got an average scouting rating on him, and his contact is acceptable, and his home run power and his eye are both potentially off the charts, and his demand has come down to $12.6 million. He's durable. He's also 6'1". I think we could conceivably try to make him a first baseman in spring training if we did get him on board. So there's an argument for me to try to get both of those guys. And the fortunate thing for me, even though I don't have quite enough money now, you may remember that we've been dumping crazy money into player development for the last 2 years, or the last 4 years actually, with the minor league seasons that we played. If we take that down to a still strong $30 million figure, gives us a lot more money to play with, and we're going to know where the draft budget needs to be when the winter meetings are completed shortly and we find out if we got real lucky in the lottery or not. I'm guessing we're probably projected to pick somewhere around 10th or so based on our record, I'm guessing. 9th. So maybe we end up getting a little luckier when the draft lottery takes place, but if not, we're going to have money that we can free up that's been budgeted there as well. So I think I am going to get greedy right now and see if we can get an offer to get Bieber on board and also potentially bring Nakajima on board. We could use a right-handed power bat. Lloyd El Chapelli and Jace Barofin, our left fielder and our right fielder, who finished 1-2 in the Rookie of the Year voting, are both left-handed hitters. And they're probably our two best offensive players at this point. So bringing in a right-handed bat with great home run power and insane eye, even if he's going to strike out a lot, could end up being a DH for us. Could end up being a corner outfielder, but I think that both Chapelli and Barofin would be better in that role. So it's really a DH/first baseman. And I don't love the fact that we only have an average scouting accuracy on him now, and it's going to take 3 weeks for the next report. But maybe we can at least see what he's looking for and get an offer out there to him. $12.6 million a year for 5 years. So he's looking for a lot of money. I've got confidence in our scout. I don't think this is going to look massively different, but if we get the next scouting report and he's 40 contact, I'm going to think differently about him than if we get the next scouting report and he's 50 contact, especially because we'll probably be high accuracy by that point. But regardless of the contact rating, if he's kind of in that average range, I don't expect that the home run power and the eye are going to look materially different because he was not, I don't think, this far off the charts when we first got to know him a few weeks ago. Actually, yeah, he was still 70 potential and 80 potential from when he first hit in the market. We actually think he's a little worse now in terms of his power. I'm going to try to get the conversation going with him. I don't really want to make a real long-term commitment, but I also don't want to potentially miss out on him. He's looking for $12.6 million a year for 5 years. We'll see if we can just get an offer out there for him to think about for the next week or so with less dollars and less money. And again, we don't really even necessarily want him to sign this contract. We just want to buy ourselves some time for the next scouting report. So we're offering him 3 years at an average of $11 million a year with a team option for the third. He is, I said, was looking for 5 years, $12.6 million. So we're offering him $1.5 million left in 2 fewer years. I don't want to insult him, but I also basically just want to get a contract out there to make him think. Hopefully he can get some more offers, and then we'll get a updated scouting report that's even more accurate before we have to make a decision or wait for his decision. And he's willing to at least think about it. So we'll submit that offer to him. I'm guessing there may be some other competition, but if he just ends up hitting us on that bid, it's not a crippling contract if he's not quite as good as we think he is. But I do think he's going to have a pretty interesting bat with the potential eye that he has and the potential home run power that he's got. And we're also going to get an offer out to Bieber. He wanted $9.3 million a year over 3 years. We're offering him $9 million a year over 3 years, a bit front loaded, 11 followed by 9 and 7 team options. So I think it's a deal that protects us pretty well. And he's willing to think about that. So we've got Ohtani locked up, and we've got pretty good sized offers out to Bieber and Nakajima. So we'll see what happens over the next few weeks. And Bieber says he's leaning towards signing to us. Nakajima says he likes our offer so far. We'll see what happens with that. And we just got the lottery results, and we moved up to number 2. So that's a huge win for Buffalo. Does mean that we're going to need to set aside a little more money than we might have before for draft, but we're still way over budget at this point. So we've got an opportunity as the off-season moves along for us to move some of that money out of the draft budget and either into player development or into potentially bringing some players on board. So we are 3 days away from the end of the winter meetings. Will we hear from Nakajima or Bieber before the end of the winter meetings? Who knows? Possible. And then less than a week after that, we've got the Rule 5 draft where maybe we can bring some more talent into our organization. But clearly, with Ohtani on board, it's going to be a big off season and a pivotal off season for these Wings. The question is, how many players can we bring on to kind of supplement him? And right now, we've got 2 big bets out on Bieber and Nakajima. And unfortunately, Bieber's comeback said our offer's not going to get it done. Arizona's rumored to be interested in him. He says he likes an offer out of Los Angeles. I'm not sure whether it's the Dodgers or the Angels. Looking for, it is the Angels. Looking for more money. Getting to the point where, given that we think he's only a 5-inning pitcher, I don't want to get incredibly ambitious with him. That said, he's still a pretty darn good pitcher. 2.73 ERA in 125 innings with the Blue Jays in 2024. Looks like he had some injuries and injury issues in 2025, but still put up a 2.89 ERA with Houston. And this past year with the Reds, a 2.94 ERA over 82 and 2/3 innings, primarily as a reliever. He could definitely help our team. Guess the question is, how aggressive do we want to get in trying to bring him on board? Alcantara still looking for about $17 million, so he's still a lot more expensive than Bieber. And when we look at the stamina of these guys, and obviously we're looking at all pitchers, not just starters, but there's not a ton of guys who could start for us. Andres Salgado could be a back end of the rotation guy. He might not be a horrible guy to make an offer to. Huascar Ynoa really looks more like a reliever to me, despite the 50 stamina. And then we're into guys like Jack Anderson, Chris Bassett, older guy with Bassett who's a decent pitcher still. Don't think he's a perfect fit, though. Jack Anderson's really a reliever. think Bieber's still the best option out there. So I think I'm going to at least make one more offer to him. And we're going to offer him a deal with average annual value of $10 million now. He says he was looking for 10.6. We've got it front loaded with 14 this year, and then team options for 8 the 2 years after that. He says he's willing to think about it, so we'll keep the lines of communication open with Mr. Bieber. And it's starting to feel like Mr. Bieber doesn't really want to sign with us, and he's just trying to get more money. He claims that the Angels are still very interested in him. He's looking for over 11 million average. We've got the capacity to really front load this thing. Going to make at least one more try. And he says he's looking for 11.1 million over 3 years. We're going to offer him 10.7 million over 3 years. Very front loaded, still with 8 and 8 for the 2 option years, but give him a nice big check for 16 million over the course of this season. Says he's willing to think about it. I do feel like he's just kind of playing us at this point, and he prefers to sign with the Angels. Take a look at what the standings were last season, and actually the Angels really aren't that much more competitive than we are. Obviously they were 500, but they're an established team, and we just brought Ohtani on board, which will certainly help close the gap between us and any team that did better than us in the standings. We'll see what happens. And we've made it to Christmas Day 2026 and the Rule 5 draft. Bieber said he likes our best offer, or likes our latest offer, but we have heard that from him before. Still obviously waiting to hear back from Nakajima. Would be great if we get that second scouting report on him. Still about a week away, unfortunately, but right now our focus is going to turn to this Rule 5 draft and see if perhaps we can find some help for us. And it looks like we're going to be picking 7th here in the Rule 5 draft. We will get things going and see who is on the board for us. Taking a look at the pitchers, some interesting names. Garrett Crochet seems like a guy who could definitely help us. He's making some pretty big money, almost $9 million a year. That's probably why he's available. But he could certainly be a pretty useful arm out of our bullpen. Yasser Mercedes, certainly in terms of potential, stands out. I don't know that we have a roster spot for him. A guy who's only played in A-ball, or only played as high as A-ball, but he did hit .331 with 16 homers in A-ball this past year. Looks like he could be a pretty decent major league hitter, has some speed, pretty versatile defensively, can play any outfield position. Miguel Blaise, center fielder. Love the glove. Love the speed. The bat's pretty average-ish. With Siri and DeLuca, center field is not a huge need for us, but perhaps we could move on from somebody like Siri if we had Blaise on board. Tucker Toman looks like a decent third baseman. And Ariel Almonte, decent looking corner outfielder. So there's definitely some players. Utility infielder is a position we need to fill. Toman's really a third baseman with those ratings. Could play first. Could play corner outfield. Ideally, we want someone who could play second and short as our utility infielder, simply because I feel like with our starting third baseman, Westberg, as well as Jones and York as potential utility infielders, we kind of have a bias towards those guys who play the corner infield spots. And right now, Edman at second base and Made at short are really our only middle infielders if we don't let Seifu, last year's number one overall pick, or I guess still technically this year's number one overall pick, if we don't have him on the roster at the start of the season, we're definitely short a middle infielder. Our scouting director recommends we go with Daniel Espino, a Panamanian reliever, 25 years old. Not a horrible profile. Spent the last couple years in AAA with Columbus, where he has not been particularly effective. Almost 26 years old, going to turn 26 in about a week and a half. Not blown away by any of the options, but we're certainly going to take a flyer on somebody. And I think we are going to overrule our scout. And I think we're going to go with the 22-year-old center fielder, Miguel Bleis. I mentioned that we've got Siri and DeLuca. DeLuca we traded for from the Dodgers just a month and a half ago. But when I look at Bleis, and I look at that defensive ability with a very pedestrian and average looking bat, but when I compare him to Siri's a pretty similar defensive player. I guess Siri's arm is a little higher. Siri's bat is not as good. Siri is almost 32 years old, and Siri's making a lot more money. I don't know how much we could get for Siri in trade, but I almost feel like we're better off bringing in Bleis, who's almost a decade younger, and letting Bleis and DeLuca fight it out for the starting center field role. I still think DeLuca's got a better bat, but Bleis would potentially have a better glove. But Jose Siri could be becoming expendable for us, I feel, if we bring Bleis into camp. And from that perspective, when I can make a real logical argument for why a guy we pick up in the Rule 5 draft is going to make our 26-man roster, and it's a guy who's only 22 years old, maybe we can help develop a little more than our scout, little more potential than our scout sees right now. We're going to bring Bleis in, see what happens, move on to the second round, and still a lot of familiar names available for us to look at. Our scout recommends we still go with Daniel Espino, who's still available, coming off of a torn UCL, so we could just stash him on the IL for the first few months of the season and then put him on a 30-day rehab assignment to get a free look at him before we have to make a decision. So I think if he's still around in the later rounds, it might make sense to take him. I don't know that we pick him right now when there might be more talented players available, or at least players who are more likely to help us in April and May than Espino, who's got no chance of doing that. And I was hoping that the other guy that I liked in addition to Bleis would still be around here in the second round. Unfortunately, he's not. Luis Frias, reliever that Seattle picked, who was the next player selected after we went with Bleis. I think certainly could have competed for a spot in our bullpen. He's been pretty good the last couple of years in his portions of the season that were spent in the majors. Would have loved to bring him on board, but I feel like Blaze, I almost have a hard time believing he's not going to be on our major league roster, assuming I can get something in a trade for Siri at some point. Whereas Frias, there was still a debate whether he would make the back end of our bullpen or not. But obviously would have loved to have them both on board, but that will not be the case. So we are still going to go pitcher here in the second round, but it's not going to be Espino. We're going to go with Emmett Sheehan, 27-year-old who's never pitched in the majors. He's in the Dodgers organization. Has really intimidating stuff with a great fastball and a great change. His movement and control are the question. But he's been pretty good in AAA and AA over the last 2 seasons. Just has never gotten a shot at the major league level with the mighty Dodgers. But I think he'd be an interesting guy for us to bring into camp. So we are going to go ahead and draft Emmett Sheehan here in the second round, move on to the third. Our scouting director still recommending Daniel Espino. We're going to see if there may be another option that's more interesting to us. And I think at this point we'll follow our scout suggestion and bring Espino into camp. As I mentioned, he's going to end up on the 60-day IL for us. But when he comes off of the IL, we'll get a free look at him for 30 days on a minor league rehab assignment. So it'll probably be sometime in mid to late July when we really need to make a decision on him when all is said and done. So can't hurt to bring him into camp and see what happens. Moving on to the fourth round, scouting director recommends that we call it a day. We will make sure that we really want to call it a day before we agree to that. And I don't think he makes the team, but Yasser Mercedes is kind of the highest potential guy out there, at least according to our scout. Could we stash him on the roster as a fifth outfielder? I guess there's some chance if we have some injuries in the outfield in spring training particularly. I like him defensively. I like his speed. Could have above average contact and home run power when all is said and done. Tend to think he's not going to be able to make the 26-man roster, but it can't hurt to give him a shot. Taking a look at where we are now, we're up to 36 players, and we've still got the offers out to, obviously, Bieber and Nakajima that we're waiting to hear on. So we could still keep going in the Rule 5 if we want to. Scout obviously recommends that we don't do anything here in round 5. Garrett Crochet is still available. Obviously, it's because he's making almost $9 million a year. But we get a free look at him in camp. Certainly over the course of his major league career, he's got 200 strikeouts in 150 and 2/3 innings, 3.29 ERA, WHIP of 126, a SIERA of 278. He's been a pretty useful pitcher. We could potentially use another lefty out of the pen. I don't know that I want to be spending almost $9 million a year for a lefty reliever. But if the salary situation for us materializes where we don't get both Bieber and Nakajima, Crochet could be as good an option as anybody to spend some of that money on. So we're going to bring him on board as our final selection in the Rule 5. And finish up the draft. Brought 5 players on board. We picked 5 of the 9 players that were taken in the draft. Who knows how many of them are going to make the roster. But as I said, I can definitely see a path to the 26-man roster for the youngster Miguel Blaze. Emmett Sheehan can definitely see a path there potentially as a 5th starter swingman. Espino is going to be on the 60-day IL. Mercedes and Crochet, who knows, but gives us more options, gives us more outs in camp if we have injuries. we'll find out in a few months how many of these guys really make our team. And we have gotten our latest report on Romash Tasuku Nakajima. Very high accuracy now, and he pretty much looks like he did before. So I think we know what we'd be potentially getting with him. I think with that home run power and that ability to draw walks, and as I said, the potential that we could probably convert him to a first baseman and or play him at DH, I don't mind the offer that we've got out to him. We'll see whether we land him or not. But I think he'd be a nice addition to our lineup. And Nakajima signed the deal that we offered. So doesn't look like there were any other bidders for him. As I said, I feel like that bat with the home run power and his ability to draw walks could be pretty useful. It's not a horrible commitment for us. 10 and 11 the next 2 years, and then a team option for $12 million for a durable veteran who looks like he could be a pretty decent 5 or 6 hitter for us. Could also play corner outfield for us if we have some injuries. I think he's a very interesting addition to our team without making a long-term commitment. So we've got Nakajima and Ohtani on board, and just waiting to hear from Shane Bieber as far as the 3 main targets that we've had this offseason. And Shane Bieber has made believers out of us. He has signed our contract. So we have landed the third of our 3 big targets for this offseason. So I think our big work for the offseason is done. We've got Ohtani and Bieber to hopefully be our 1-2 starters, and we've got Nakajima to be a big bat in the middle of our lineup. I think it's been a really interesting offseason for the Wings. You can see we don't have a ton of money available now, even with cutting our player development and our draft budget. Part of that is the fact that Crochet's contract is counting against us right now. No guarantees that we're going to have him for the long term, but certainly feel like we've got decent financial flexibility despite the big contracts. Obviously, Ohtani is the big layout, and because I must have messed that up and made the contract based on 162 games started instead of 162 innings pitched. It's really a 5-year deal, so it's not as favorable to us in terms of the average dollar amount as I had hoped it would be. Maybe that's why he signed it. But at least that number is going to be going down for the next several years. Vasquez, we can move on from after this year. Bieber, we can move on from after this year. Crochet, even if he makes the team, we can move on after this year. And Edman, we can move on after this year. So we still have got a fair amount of payroll flexibility for next season. But I think we've added our top 2 starters, and we've added a big bat for the lineup. So really the only other thing for us to think about in this offseason is going to be a utility infielder type guy. And again, the utility infielder is not critical. Because right now we've got Edman at second, Made at short, and Seifu certainly would be taking over for Edman as our second baseman or starting somewhere if he makes the team. The issue is just if we start Seifu down in AAA for a month or 2, would be decent and helpful if we had a guy who could back up Edman and Made effectively at those middle infield positions. So that's really the only other chore we still have on our list for the next month and a half or so, or I guess a couple of months till spring training gets going in earnest. So it's been a pretty eventful off season for the Wings so far, and it's only January 3rd. We've still got almost a month till the preseason begins. We've got 2 more international free agent camps to run, one here in the month of January and then another one in the month of February. So we'll certainly spend some time digging deep on that in our next episode. But fan interest is off the charts after bringing on Ohtani and Bieber. And you can see that they're already penciled in as our 1-2 starters for next year as expected, followed by Sean Sullivan, who had a nice rookie year for us. Right now, our bench coach recommends Bryce Miller and Humberto Rosado as our 4 and 5 starters. I could still see myself forcing Tyler McGill into the rotation. But we've got some decisions to make there, and then certainly Nakajima is penciled in as our starting DH against righties, left fielder against lefties, and cleanup hitter according to our bench coach. But the bench coach also says that reigning National League Rookie of the Year Loidel Chappelli should not be in either of our starting lineups against right-handers or left-handers. So I am not convinced that that is the right answer. It's also interesting that he suggests starting Blaze in center field against righties, still keeping Siri against lefties. But I think if we're able to move on from Siri in our next episode, that potentially could also open up some playing time for some other guys that we would prefer. I tend to think that I'm going to probably want Chappelli's bat in the lineup over DeLuca or Blaze, so I think it's unlikely that both of them would be starting. They'll be fighting each other for starting center field position most likely, but it's hard for me to think that Chappelli is not going to be getting regular at-bats for us next season. And with that, we are going to call it an episode. We're going to continue with the off season in our next episode. As I said, international amateur free agency, and perhaps looking at a way to trade away Jose Siri are going to be the top things on our list in that episode. And we're going to start preparing this team for the 2027 season. Expectations are certainly going to be higher with the 3 big free agents that we've brought on board. And hopefully the Wings can be pushing for a 500 record next year. And if we're pushing for a 500 record, probably means we're going to be, at least at some point in the conversation, for competing for a wild card. And that would obviously be a huge step forward if we're able to be 500 and competing for a wild card in our second year in Major League Baseball. And we'll find out how our progress towards those goals continues in our next episode. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.